Welcome to the Fighting on Film podcast, the podcast all about classic and obscure war movies, from the Normandy landings to the days of chivalry and swords. If it's been captured on film, we're going to try and cover it. I'm Robbie of RM Military History.
I'm Matthew Moss of Historical Firearms and the Armourer's Bench.
Welcome back to Fighting on Film, everybody. Now, this week we have some amazing news to share with you. If you've been active on our Twitter and our socials, we are going to the Tank Museum's Fury Experience on the 18th of March. We're going to be recording an episode and talking to David Wiley.
Best experience I ever had.
Yeah.
I can't wait. It's going to be great fun.
It's going to be fantastic. And if you're a Patreon member, don't forget that you can also claim 20% off a ticket. And there's a couple of weeks' notice to get your ticket, but you can claim 20% off with a code on the Patreon. So please check it out if you haven't already.
Yeah, massive thank you to the Tank Museum for letting us offer that to patrons.
Yes, we're really looking forward to it. And if you're there, we'll see you on the 18th. Come say hello. So this week we are covering a 1989 film called 84 Charlie MoPic, and it's a Vietnam War film.
We've had so many people asking us to cover this, haven't we? Every time we mention we're going to do a Vietnam War film, someone always mentions 84 Charlie MoPic.
To run down the plot very briefly before we do our regular rundown of actors and production, the film is based on a long-range recon patrol unit, the LRRP, or LRRP, abbreviated to, and they're on a mission, and it's all told from the perspective of the cameraman, hence the Charlie MoPic, the motion picture part of it. And the film is shot, it's like a found footage movie. So all the camera work in the movie is if you're actually there. It's a very rare within the genre to use that method of filming.
It's like found footage sort of approach, isn't it? It's often more associated with the horror genre than the war film genre.
Yeah, like Blair Witch and Paranormal Activity. Yeah, it's like that. I think this might be the only time that it's used in a narrative war movie. I know you get a lot of documentaries from Vietnam War era that are shot like that in the field, but you don't get a narrative movie like them, really.
I can't think of any other examples that try the approach.
No.
If people can think of anything that even comes close, do let us know. But yeah, it's an interesting concept, and I think it has its pluses and minuses. I think when it comes to that attempt at using the found footage element of it. Some of it's really quite good, though, I must say.
Some of it works really well. Some of it doesn't, and it'll become clear as we go along. So I'm on production this week. So the film's directed by Patrick Sheane Duncan, who is actually a Vietnam War veteran himself. He wrote the 1987 HBO series Vietnam War Stories, which had a young Wesley Snipes in it, if anyone's seen that.
It did, didn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and he also went on to write 1996's Courage Under Fire with Denzel Washington.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it? The film was shot in South California on 16mm film reel. It was an independent production. It was distributed by New Century Vista Film Company in April of 1989. And it's obviously, as we mentioned, found footage genre. And Dale Dye's Warrior Inc. did the military advising on it. And it's actually mentioned on Warriors Inc.'s website. And the chap who did the advising is called Russ Thurman, and he was doing the advising because Dale Dye was appearing in the Super Carrier series at the time. And from their website, it says, we designed a week-long training curriculum for the long-range reconnaissance patrol members. We spent a good deal of time on reconnaissance techniques, stealthy movement in the field, camouflage discipline, and small arms familiarization.
Pretty cool.
We got a review this week from the Washington Post. It's from May 27th, 1989. We'll join the review about halfway through. Designed to chronicle a single mission into the jungle, the point of which is never made clear, the film is structured as a cinema verite diary recorded by a cameraman from MoPic, the Army Motion Picture Corps. The desired effect is one of intimacy, that you are there in the sensation. But because the perspective is so limited, every shot is from this one camera mounted on the man's shoulder. Never have you felt so emotionally distanced from the action, so uninvolved. It doesn't help either that the sound recording is so shoddy that the dialogue is virtually unintelligible at times, or that whatever talk can be understood is so unremarkable. The details of the soldier's life are so well known by now from previous films. When one of the boys rhapsodizes about dry socks, you're sure you've seen this same scene before, or one just like it before. The director's technique isn't much of a help to the actors, who, if they register at all, are one-dimensional as the characters' generic nicknames. The principal deficit, though, is the film's lack of urgency, because it has nothing new to contribute to our perceptions about the war. You wonder why it was made.
So there's some elements that I agree with, and there's some I disagree with. So I disagree that it's the characters are one-dimensional. I don't think they are. There's some good development to some of them.
Yeah, I agree there.
And I don't feel like it was a film that didn't need to be made. I think what is being perhaps described there is perhaps there's an element of fatigue around the Vietnam War genre.
Definitely at that time.
Of that late 80s period.
Yeah.
I think perhaps, we've had the Vietnam War Story TV series, we've had Platoon, we've had the majority of the big Vietnam War films by that point, Hamburger Hill, etc.
Casualties of War was in 89 as well.
Exactly. Five Ace Gloria. There's been a whole glut at that point, and it does speak to perhaps a little bit of fatigue, because maybe the reason that these characters are so often shown is because they reflect the people that were there, them being stereotypes. Some films do make them stereotypes. I don't think this film goes the whole hog of making them stereotypes. I think some of them perhaps are, but that might be acting ability. But I think really the characters are quite well defined. The actors, although mostly unknown, are, they carry them quite well.
I think so too.
The directing's fine. I think the single point camera thing, it works. And I didn't really have an issue with the sound either. I mean, I could hear it, but perhaps it's been remastered, and when it came up on Prime.
The version we watched was on Amazon Prime. It's quite good. If you've got Prime, do seek it out. It's worth watching. Yeah, I think the review is a little bit scathing in places. I think for an independent production, it has a lot of scope. How
did it do in the one-word reviews?
Oh, yes. So this week, the one-word reviews. Yeah, we put it out every Monday. If you're on the Twitter, please join in. So we had
at Fighting on Film.
At Fighting on Film, yeah. So Andy HB said underrated, which I tend to agree with. Gary from Calais said excellent. Natsec Nerd says watchable. And Charlie Sherpa said self-reflective. And I think that's probably quite a good few words there to sum up the movie. I do think it's underrated. And I think it might be underrated because of maybe the style puts some people off watching it. If you're not a fan of that found footage thing, it can feel a bit disjointed. It can feel a little bit, I do agree with the review, at times it does feel like you're not part of the action.
Yeah.
But if you've seen TV news reports or combat footage from the Vietnam War era, it's not shot like a movie. It of course it's not, because the cameraman can't get that close to the act. You do see firefights. There's clips of patrols shot by CBS News reports in the early 70s, in the late 60s, where you see a far off firefight. And by the time the cameraman's caught up to it, you've got GIs, searching bodies and trying to find information. You don't see the action. There's parts of the movie that really do feel quite authentic, but then there's parts of the movie where it does feel like, okay, the movie has to do this because you couldn't develop any of the characters or plot if you didn't do certain parts of the film. As I'll talk about later, I feel like they could have been done differently. But yeah, there were some great one-word reviews this week, guys. And in terms of awards, the movie did really well. It won the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance in 1989, which is, a fantastic award for a first-time director like Patrick Duncan to get. And then he had Best Feature and Screenplay at the Independent Spirit Film Awards as well. So it did well. It was well received.
Yeah, that is impressive.
I know financially, I don't think it did very well, but I couldn't find a budget. So I think it made just over $150,000 at the box office. So that might have recouped its budget. Well, I don't know.
Perhaps.
I couldn't find any solid information.
The fact it's shot in South California and it's only a minimal cast, I think that probably helped it on budget side. Speaking of cast, I have cast this week, and it's a small but fairly well-rounded cast. There's no one in there that's really particularly well known. LT, the lieutenant that joins, is the lieutenant which joins the patrol, is played by Jonathan Emerson, and he had lots of small TV roles. He was the newscaster in Mars Attacks.
Okay.
Easy, played by Nicholas Cascone, who's a short timer. And he originally appeared in Vietnam War Story, which the director wrote. as Zadig, his character was called. And he also had a small role in Titanic as well. Pretty Boy was played by Jason Tomlins. He was a boom operator on Vietnam War Story.
Amazing.
And subsequently had a few TV roles. Hammer was played by Christopher Burgard. He was in Tour of Duty, another Vietnam War TV series.
That's a classic.
And he did lots of other, I think that ran for like 3 seasons, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. Did quite well.
And then he was in lots of other TV after that. Cracker was played by Glenn Morshower, who's probably the most successful of the cast, actually. He's been in lots of TV. He was in Under Siege with Steven Seagal. He was in Heroes of Desert Storm, By Dawn's Early Light, War and Remembrance. He was in Air Force One with Harrison Ford. He was in Black Hawk Down as well. And then outside of the war genre, lots of TV roles, lots and lots of stuff there.
Is that the southerner guy?
That's right, yeah.
Cracker. He played Halsey in Pearl Harbor, I think, as well.
Did he? Okay.
I think he did, yeah.
OD, the hard sergeant, was played by Richard Brooks, who was also in Tour of Duty, and it did lots of TV since Law and Order, NCIS, Good versus Evil, lots of TV.
In Firefly, I think, as well.
He was, yeah, that's right, yeah. And then MoPic himself was played by Byron Thames. He was also in War Story, and has done lots of TV and voice acting since. And that rounds out the cast, really.
Yeah, it's a very small cast. You don't get anyone else. You don't even see anyone else, do you?
No, I mean, you barely see the Vietnamese, the MVA. You get little glimpses of them in the distance. And, there's the prisoner they take, but you barely see his face. You definitely don't get a long or the short and the tall element to this one.
No, you don't.
There's a little bit where they question whether they should take the body of one of the guys that is killed or the prisoner. And that's an interesting but very brief moral aspect to the film.
It's in and it's out in like 5 seconds, I think. And we talked about early on issues. Like there's parts of the movie where I just wish they'd gone into more depth. The main thing about the movie is it's meant to be a filmed combat mission by this MoPic guy for use by the army or, the Marines or whoever to show how you do a combat mission as a LRRP team.
Yeah.
And it starts off interestingly enough because, they get down and then they bicker about, they're like, make sure MoPic's kit's all stowed away, make sure, gaffer tape up your little odds and sods because you don't want to make a noise.
Like
and then for the rest of the movie, I know, sorry, yeah. It's the bane of my existence, it's bloody chair. But for the rest of the movie, they're just non-stop chatting and talking. And a LRRP team just wouldn't do that.
No, absolutely not. Like the noise, the sound that they're making in on that patrol is just too much.
Yeah,
I agree with that. And the lieutenant should have probably explained the mission of the MoPic guy and his mission to create this training film before they left, because he does it in the field. They're on the patrol. They take a break. He sits down and they start chatting. He asks him a couple of questions. It's when they're sorting out the kit that you mentioned, and he asks him, questions. And he says, well, that's what we're here for. We're here to film this and learn some of those things and take them back. That's a little bit disjointed for me, because then he explains that he volunteered for LRRP because he wants to be in the ship, basically. He wants to be in combat and get ahead. He wants to be a captain or a major by the time he leaves Vietnam. And
that was quite true, actually, of Vietnam. I've been reading a book called Kill Anything That Moves, which is about the American war crimes that were committed in Vietnam. But there was a whole sort of culture of officers wanting to go to Vietnam because it was how you got promoted. It was how you bettered yourself as a careerist soldier. You went out to Vietnam, you saw some action.
Yeah.
So that's quite true. I thought that element of it was interesting. But then how he just goes from being, as you said, this meant to be this guy working with MoPic as a sort of director trying to sort of hold it all together. That's how I saw him at the start. To then go to this, oh no, I want to be like a gun-ho LT. It's a bit it's too much of a character shift there.
Yeah.
It just doesn't help. I don't think it helps the narrative. I was watching a Siskel and Ebert review they did, and Siskel said he only liked the movie when it was doing things that felt like a war movie. When it was doing all the chatting and the everything else, it felt like a narrative movie, and you were forced to watch these sections so the plot could be developed. that's where it fell down, because I was like, oh, okay, I know you're having this speech with your sergeant or your corporal or whatever, because you have to, because I, as an audience member, have to know what you're doing. But there's just a way you could have shot that. There's a way you could have got that in there without having to do it all the time.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps it's directorial inexperience.
Could be
with the concept of a one camera setup, and it's all first person. I think it's interesting that they crammed as many Vietnamisms into it as possible. Loads. And I don't mean that as tropes. I mean, there's lots of little things in there that obviously the right director wanted to get in from his experience, or that sort of thing. So there's bits where he's talking about you shouldn't have your grenades hung from your flak jacket, because if you accidentally pull a pin and it drops, and you can kill yourself. You should tape them up, make sure that the pins aren't going to come out. Then there's lots of really cool stuff about how to set up booby traps, and to also find them. One thing that stuck out to me was there's a bit where they're about to bring in an artillery fire mission down on a MVA regiment or battalion that they've come across, and they're talking about, well, we'll leave chewing gum wrappers around here, make it look like we're a platoon, and then we'll leave this one helmet. And he sets up a grenade under the helmet. You're in contact at that point. You're about to go into action. You aren't going to be talking and explaining to a camera in such detail. That's something that you could do back at base. And I don't think in reality, someone on a LRRP where noise control is at a maximum would have been going, well, I'll take your hat, LT, and we'll, your helmet, and I'll put a grenade under it, and you pull a little string and the pin comes out, and
that's the thing where you have to suspend this belief a little bit. It's
too much. That's what it is.
It's where the method of filming the movie falls flat for me, because you can't not say that directly to the audience, because they have to know it.
I think at that point there should have been like a cut-off where everything got serious, and the whole filming the mission as a method of training back home ceased, where it was just he documented it. He wasn't asking them to explain things and talk about themselves, etc. That continues after the first contact with the enemy, and it doesn't work as well.
Minutes are the strongest part of the movie for me, and I'll talk about it later. But I completely get what you mean. I mean, like to say my final thoughts early is I wish they'd have cut back to maybe perhaps, this is where my sort of, I'll mention it later on, but I think more budget would have helped the movie. But I wish they would have had sections where they were doing it, like the guy with that grenade you were talking about, he could have just been doing it, and then you could have cut back to a, like a LRRP or someone at Recondo who trained the LRRPs up, being like, oh, this is the thing that we do when we're out on patrol. Like, this is a great thing to do for LRRP units, and then cut back to the next sequence.
Yeah, so that would have been that would have been interesting.
So it's been edited after the fact.
You could have had it so as you were watching the finished product.
That's how I thought. That's how I wished it would be. I've seen this movie 3 or 4 times now, and every time I watch it, I'm like, oh, I see.
And you can
there's a chance here.
You can do an effective thing where there isn't much dialogue. I mean, look at Contact, for instance. The UK, the British movie about Northern Ireland on a patrol. It's a similar sort of idea.
Very much so.
And there's no speaking in that whatsoever, really.
No, there's maybe a page of dialogue if you're lucky in that movie. Yeah, that's right. I didn't actually make that connection. That's a really good way. If you haven't seen that movie, by the way, people, that is a fantastic one to seek out.
Really interesting.
We're trying to get a good guest on for that when we do it. But perhaps with all this talk of things we didn't like, maybe we should talk about things we do, and we love a bit of Alley Tally. So maybe we should segue into that.
Absolutely.
It's time for Alley Tally on Fighting on Film.
So, as always, the Alley Tally is our segment where we discuss cool kit and weaponry. And this week, Rob, I think I know what you're going to pick.
I recently dug out my Vietnam kit that I used to do reenactment in, and saved it all, like cleaned it all up and things like that. And I've been lusting after this particular weapon for a few months now, and it's the XM177E2, which is if you're modern firearms, it's the forerunner to the M4 carbine.
Yeah,
it was developed during the Vietnam War, called the CAR-15 as well. You see both terms used when people refer to the weapon, CAR-15 or carbine. It was developed as a submachine gun at the time, and it's a small version of the M16. Basically, I mean the early version was just like a mini M16 A1.
Yeah, with the triangular foreguard and everything.
Yeah, and it ended up being really well thought of by MACV-SOG, those really sort of special elite special forces units, and they ordered 510 of them in 1968, and they made their way to theatre. They weren't officially used by the army because they didn't put in an order, from my research, but they do appear with LRRP teams. They appear with sometimes some infantry have them, air cav use them too, but no one's really sure, and I haven't seen any really solid evidence to say how those weapons made it from.
There's photographic evidence, but
there's photographic evidence. There's not written down evidence. I mean, they even end up in the hands of Australian SAS teams. God knows how they got them, but they did. Anyway, that's just for another time. But this movie has two of them. So Easy has one and OD has one. And I don't think they're real XM177E2s. I think they're what other movies at the time were using were Colt sporting carbine lookalikes with
like the civilian version of it.
Civilian version with the flash hider welded on.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what they are, because Casualties of War has them too, and I think they might be the same weapon. I'm not sure where they got their weapons from this. I absolutely adore that gun. I think it's such an interesting weapon that was developed in the war. It's sort of on those iconic guns of Nam, and then it breeds the M4 carbine that is just taken a complete world of its own.
What's really interesting about that is they actually talk about it in the film. So there's a bit where the lieutenant says, "I thought SOP for a radio op was a pistol sidearm."
That's it. Yeah.
And Easy basically laughs that off and says, "Well, of course I want a bit more firepower."
Where does he say everyone needs a gook shooter? Is that what he says?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's another one of those heavy Vietnam dialogue exchanges.
And they refer to it as a carbine in the film, which I thought was quite interesting.
Yeah.
Not wrong.
No, it's not. And I just thought it was really interesting that they specifically pointed that out. I mean, I've seen photographs of 173rd on LOPs taken by 221st Singles photographers. It looks pretty accurate, the film. In kit wise, it's pretty good. It's not banged on by any means, but it's pretty good, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a minute, I'm sure. But in some of those photographs, the guys do have XM177s, and
there's a decent mix of firearms. You've got your classic M16A1 that's synonymous with that war. I think the Cracker has is it a Remington shotgun? I couldn't be too sure. Or was it
I think so, something like that, yeah.
Mossberg.
Don't think it was an Ithaca, yeah.
Yeah.
You don't. The one thing about the film is you don't get to see the weapons entirely too clearly.
No, which is it's another thing about the way it's been filmed, isn't it? Obviously, that's another
it is.
thing.
And one of the things that you do get to see briefly is an M21 sniper weapon system, or what's supposed to be. It's probably an M1A that's been mocked up, I would imagine, but it's supposed to be that. It's supposed to be basically a sniper rifle M14. It's really cool because you see Cracker opening it up, taking out the stock to clean it, and he's oiling.
Cool.
And he pops it back together. And these guys are all moving through the jungle. And OD and Cracker both have sniper rifles. One's the M21 and one's a bolt action.
And they're all like gaffer taped up in their bags and hanging off their big, large packs, which I really quite liked.
And they're civilian bought bags too, so it's just a black rifle slip.
Yeah, it's nice.
Really interesting to see. That was a really good inclusion, but we don't get to see it used, which is a bit of a shame.
Yeah, but as the LRRPs are represented quite well, I think for uniform-wise, they're all wearing tiger stripe that was heavily favoured by the LRRP teams. It wasn't regulation, but as it was used by advisors early on in the Vietnam conflict, and it was bought in country, and then from that, the US Army developed Erdl pattern camouflage in 1968, I think. and that became quite popular as well. So you see a variation, but they've all got tiger stripe on. I think it's iconic. It's an iconic look, isn't it? But then LT and MoPic, they're just wearing third pattern jungle fatigues, and LT is an FNG, the fucking new guy, and he's got his flak jacket on. Yeah. He's got everything hanging off him. He looks like he just literally just walked out of the quartermaster's stores. Yeah. There's some good dialogue where they're like, "Are you still wearing your flak jacket in the jungle, LT?" Sort of iconic look of that war, because I think when we think of Hue, Marines at Hue, they're all wearing them, especially in full metal jacket. That's another little iconic thing there.
And they all had the correct 20 round mags.
They did as well. That was a nice addition.
Yeah.
And I think OD at one point has jungle magged 20 mags as well.
Yes, I thought that too.
When he goes into the firefight, he has them on, which I thought was a nice little inclusion, because it shows, he's ready for the firefight. He wants to have that quick reload ability. I really liked.
There's a little bit where he tells the LT not to load 20 rounds into his mag, load 18, so he doesn't jam. Those little bits worked really well, I thought. They were before
they did.
Things got serious and they got in contact. There was elements of that worked really well. I think another thing, OD had his beret.
That's nice. The only thing that annoyed me was Easy had a helmet on. All the pictures of LRRPs I've seen, all the research I've done of LRRP teams, I don't think they ever really wore helmets.
No, I suppose it's extra noise, isn't it?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, he had a hot weather cap on early on, but I just thought it was weird for him to have a helmet. But maybe because he's a radio guy, maybe he did. I don't know.
Yeah, perhaps so.
Just interesting inclusion for me. So, anything else for your alley pick?
The M60 was cool. There's quite a lot of suppressing fire, quite accurate as it would have been.
Although, did you see the bit where he was having his sort of like moment to camera where he was talking about like life and stuff, and he went to like load this M60 up with a fresh belt, and he tried to push down the top of it, and it didn't click, but he just held his hand over it like to stop it, to make it look like it clicked in place.
I didn't notice that.
Did you notice that?
No, I didn't.
It was funny. I don't know if it's intentional or not, but surely I was like, do another take. It didn't click.
He's clearly like, he's done a good take there, and he's like, I'm not wasting this. I'm gonna play this off like this is closed properly.
But then it felt authentic as well. If it's meant to be found footage, it did work. But I just thought it was a funny inclusion. So that was another action-packed alley tally there. I mean, I'm a massive fan of Vietnam War movie genre, and obviously having done reenactment of it before, I always love seeing the kit represented on screen. It was nice to see LRRPs represented rather than just ordinary grunts. Which is always nice. Hello, Robbie here. Did you know you can support the podcast on Patreon? Join the supporting cast today and gain access to exclusive perks, such as discount codes, our monthly Patreon film votes, and the chance to get exclusive merchandise before anyone else. Search Fighting on Film on Patreon or find the link on our website. Thank you. Now back to the show. Matt, favourite scene?
My favourite scene is one of those pieces of the movie where they're doing something instructive to the camera. They stop mid-trail, and the word comes down the line, and it says to MoPic, and he says, there's something that you need to see. And he moves up down the trail and gets to OD, and OD points into the grass, and you can't see anything initially. And then he runs his hand along a tripwire, and illustrating that there's a tripwire, and he takes it down and across to a Chinese grenade that the Vietnamese have left on the trail. And he explains how it works, what would happen. The point man would trip it, and then everyone else would dive for cover in the brush either side of the trail. And then he leads MoPic back down the trail a little way and pulls back some tall grass. And there is a little clump of punji sticks that have been left.
Yeah.
Illustrating that, once everyone dives for cover, you dive for cover onto the punji sticks. And that's a really nice illustration of the realities of jungle warfare. And you see that in training films. And I think you mentioned, Robert, that it was in a CBS.
Yeah, there's a great, it's on YouTube actually, if you guys want to seek it out. If you're a fan of like Vietnam War reporting, so I think it's incredible. You get some incredible reports from Vietnam, from civilian news crews. and it's called Grunt's Little War. I think it was CBS in 1970, but there's a battle-hardened NCO, and he's explaining really like almost verbatim to the movie of how, you know, they use a Chi-Com grenade, and it's how they take the insides out and put something different in, how they rig it up for it to blow. The great thing about this movie is, I think we mentioned it before, is the detail in the minutia, when it really goes into that, is really strong.
Yes, that's very true.
That felt like something out of a training video where you would get like a, you know, where he goes, "Oh, come over here, check this out. This is important." That felt like something you could show other LRRP teams to be on the lookout.
And I like the bit where MoPic was like, "Can you move that?" And he, you know, moves the grass a bit more.
Yeah, that was really nice.
That's a nice, intimate part of that idea of it being the training film. There's loads of other bits like that. There's bits where they tell the lieutenant not to smoke, especially menthol. There's a bit where they tell, you know, they joke, "Are you trying to get us killed, MoPic?" Because he's dropped chewing gum wrappers on the floor. There's bits where I think it's Cracker that explains that he swapped the fuse from a signal grenade into his frag. So it's a shorter fuse, so it'll go off faster. Yeah, I think there's loads of really nice little things that they crammed in there. And there's loads of really good Vietnam dialogue in there that works quite well. Although some of it's a little bit forced. Some of it is really forced at times. Got lots of little idioms for being a short timer.
"I'm so short, you have to dig a hole in the ground to kick my ass."
Yeah,
you know,
I'm like so short, I could parachute off a dime. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great though.
They're memorable, but they're a bit heavy.
It's cliched, but you hear stuff like that. You read stuff like that in Vietnam War books and things. People talk like that. You know, it's quite thing, but I think it's laying it on a bit thick sometimes. But no, I do like that bit. It's good. And then obviously you get that really great bit of practical effects where they do have to dive out the way of some MVA troops who are walking through, and LT jumps down and he puts his arm through one of the punji sticks.
Yep.
And that's really visceral. Like,
it's very
really
good, actually, considering the budget of the film.
Yeah, really well done. The effects work on that's top notch. And then they take it out and he has to get it like bandaged up. But that made me wince. You know, it was very, very visceral. Very good.
What about you?
For me, yeah. So this week, as I've said all the way through, I think the movie's at its strongest when it is replicating like war footage that I've seen of Nam, and I know in our line of work, Matt, for our YouTube channel, we watch a lot of archival clips of combat footage and things. So you get to sort of a feel of what it sometimes looks like on camera. I'm not saying I'm an expert in it, but I know how it's sometimes filmed.
Yeah, for sure.
So there's a section of the film. It's after they've done the artillery strike, and they decide that they can't leave any stragglers because they'll attack.
That's my second favorite pick.
Is that your second favorite pick? Fair enough.
I just like the bit where they call it in, and you get to see a distant airstrike. Well, it is an airstrike. It's airstrike and artillery. Really
well. Like seeing it. I think that's another great shot of the movie where you don't see it up front. You just see it going off. Because I felt like, well, that's how these guys would act to it. You know, once you've seen one artillery strike, you've probably seen them all in theatre, I guess. And to them, it's just a part of their mission. They're not.
Once they knew it was on target, they just got out of there quick.
Yeah, exactly. So after that scene, they decide to take out any stragglers because they don't want the next LRRP patrol or GI patrol to be attacked by the stragglers. So they go and clear the sort of the brush out of MVA. And there's a little section, it's a tiny little section where they're sorting out how they're going to attack this group of MVA in the clearing. And it does feel like found footage because you feel like you're watching it play out where it goes, look, there's a guy with the rocket launcher and you've got to kill that motherfucker. Mm-hmm. And he shows them like where the guys are, you know, you do this so OD throws a grenade. And then you see two of the lads rise up out of their little bit of cover. They fire a few bursts from their XM177s, and it's over. It's over in like 10 seconds, 15 seconds, if that. And I really enjoyed that because it felt like an actual engagement. It wasn't like a prolonged firefight, like where you see you see MVA running in from one side, MVA running in from another. It's not like a traditional war films firefight where you have to see both sides exchanging fire. You just see the lads pop up, they do what they've got to do, and it's over. And I really enjoyed that, because in that sequence, MoPic, the cameraman, isn't just filming a static mid shot of them all chatting. It's him, moving the camera through cover. It felt more like how a cameraman would have to react to these situations. I just wish we'd had more of it, because I think that's when the movie is really strongest. And there's another section where OD gets shot and they're trying to get to the evac point, and there's a tiny bit of contact at the other end of the road, that they're on this clearing.
Yeah, and you don't see it. It's out of frame.
You don't see it, yeah. And by the time the cameramans turn around, the two lads are sort of reloading after they've engaged. And I thought that was really good filmmaking. And just the final shot, spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, MoPic doesn't make it out alive, and they're flying away in the Huey, and there's a boot that just comes up next to the camera, and that's it.
That's very good, actually. I like that.
And the shot of the boot as they take off is really, really
and then
powerful.
It runs out to the end of the reel, and that's it.
That's nice. It's a nice touch, yeah.
That speaks to what you were talking about earlier, in that it adds reality when you don't see these things as clearly as you would in a set piece action movie. It's showing the contact, because they don't expect it. They're on a trail talking. They're trying to organize how they're going to move a wounded man, and then the enemy just open fire on them. And that's it. All hell breaks loose. And there's lots of little unexpected bits like that. There's another bit where Hammer takes point because OD's been wounded.
Yes.
And it's clear that he's not as experienced as OD, but he is experienced. It's a little bit. I'm sure everyone would have taken point fairly equally in a lot of patrol, but he moves off and immediately hits a trip mine, trips a grenade.
That's done really well as well, because that's out of frame, isn't it? That's not you're concentrating on OD because he's
just
shooting.
Visible. Yeah, you're not expecting it.
Boom. Goes off behind. That's really nicely done. As I said, I think the movie is at its strongest from the 50-minute mark onwards. It's that 40-minute section where everything starts to go a little bit shit is where it's at its strongest. I mean, maybe that segues into final thoughts this week.
Hello, I'm Al Murray, and you're listening to Fighting on Film, the world's #1 war film podcast.
I enjoyed it, but I wasn't blown away, is how I would phrase it. I'm not going to recommend it. I would recommend it, actually. I'd say it's an interesting variation on the Vietnam War subgenre. I was hoping for a little bit more from it, because this is the first time I'd seen it, and it'd been recommended a number of times to me. It just wasn't as well done and as exciting as I thought it could have been. It could have had more to that patrol. They could have had interactions with local populace. They could have moved through villages. They could have done various.
Could have told us what the fucking objective was.
Yeah, they could have.
They never
it could have been
that.
laid out a little bit better too. Some of the things that annoyed me was the lack of noise control when that was such a big thing for LRPs. Some of them, like, they wouldn't talk once they left the firebase until they got back. Yeah, that kind of grated on me. And some of the stuff that they were doing once they were essentially on the run from the Vietnamese, like the almost ritual prep of Pretty Boy's body, went on a little bit too long. So, the taking of the dog tag from his boot, putting it in his mouth, gaffer taping his mouth up, closing his poncho up. It was set out to be a ritual, and you could see that that's what they were going for, but it just didn't seem like, even in that situation, and yes, they've had a loss and it's their friend, but I don't think they would take so long when they know the Vietnamese are so close, the BC is so close at hand, and they do that twice.
Yeah, that's the thing with the pacing for me. It's too slow when I feel like
if that had happened
pace
earlier in the film, perhaps after the first contact, but not after the airstrike, then that would have fitted in better there. But it just doesn't work for me there.
I did feel that. I felt like it dragged when it didn't need to in that section.
Yeah, and that's just a pacing issue, I think. And I've seen lots of comments that vary. Some Vietnam veterans saying that it's actually a very good representation of patrols, and I've seen others that have said that it isn't how LARPs, would have operated.
Yeah, me too.
I've seen a number of discussions around that from people who were army photographers. So 84 Charlie MoPic is an MOS. It's a specialty. That's the code. That's the alphanumeric reference. And there's lots of those guys that have commented on the film over the years and said, well, when I was embedded with LARP teams, it wasn't quite like that. But not every LARP team is the same. So
no,
there's some leeway there, isn't there? But as I say, I enjoyed the film. I just think it could have been lifted a little bit in places by slightly better, perhaps, pacing and direction. I thought the dialogue was good. I thought the characters were really good, actually. I thought some of the conversations they had were really interesting. And I liked the 2 camera bits where the guys looked a little bit awkward when they started doing the interview, because they have to talk about themselves. And then at the end of the interview, where they clearly wanted to be over, and they just kind of look at the camera and then look away. You get that awkward feel. It feels human and realistic.
Yeah, because Cracker gets annoyed, doesn't he, when MoPic asks him a question about OD, and then he's like, "You can turn that fucking camera off now."
Yeah, he talks about race because he's from South Carolina, and he asks, "Would you be friends with him back in the States?" And Cracker explains that they're very, very close friends, and they trust each other with their lives. That's a real world question, he says, which is a great line again.
Real world question. That was good. And he was the strongest. Him and OD were the strongest characters for me. They felt like real people because of that friendship, I think, and that bond they'd written them to have. I enjoy the stylistic choice because there aren't any found footage movies like this in the war movie genre. I wanted the director to do more. I wanted them to try more. How we were saying earlier, you could have had the cutting in of someone talking to camera being like, and remember, this is how you set up a ambush, or blah, 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 this or whatever, or cut them in chatting back at the fire base as if it's been edited after the fact. There's way more you could have done with the idea and the concept.
I'm surprised more films haven't been made in a similar style, really, within the war film genre.
Imagine like a one now, you could have a whole war movie shot on someone's phone from their perspective.
Oh God, yeah, easily. You could easily have an Iraq War or Afghanistan. I'd love an AFPU based one. That'd be great. That
would be fantastic. Yeah, I mean, there's so that it lends itself to so much. But I just wanted the film to have a couple of extra zeros on it. Maybe been filmed in the jungle as well. And sometimes it did that thing where. Did you ever play like the light gun games with the video?
Oh yeah,
video gun games, like the cowboy ones. They'd have someone talking to you directly.
Yeah.
When OD says to MoPic, "You go and get in the chopper," that felt like a VHS game sort of cutscenes. It felt a bit, you know what I mean by that? It was a little bit.
I do. Yeah, it's kind of like
on the nose.
It's instructional.
Yeah, it felt a little bit like that. I'd love to see maybe a remake of this or another film take of that found footage genre, because it really does remind me of, there's a couple of movies I wanted to mention. If you enjoy this movie, because I would recommend it. I think it's important within the genre.
Yeah.
There's a movie called The Anderson Platoon, directed by the same director as Bien Dien Phu, Pierre Schoendorfer, filming a section, a platoon, very much in the style of MoPic. And there's also Faces of War, which is a 1968 documentary. It follows a US Marine Corps platoon on patrol. And it really reminds me of those movies because they're all filmed embedded in with the troops. I feel like maybe what this movie may have been based on in some cases. I do think it's a good film. It's not a fantastic movie, but it's not a bad movie. I think if it had come out maybe earlier with a bit more budget, it might have been more remembered. But I don't think time's been kind to this one. But I hope it finds a new audience, because it's a good film, just a tiny bit flawed for me.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with that.
Thanks yet again for listening, everybody. Do join us at the Tank Museum if you can on the 18th of March. We'd love to see you if you're there, if you're a Fury fan. Check us out on our socials. We're on Facebook, Twitter. Coming up next week, we have a treat. We have Yesterday's Enemy with Hammer film historian Marcus Hearn as our guest. So look out for that.
Oh, that's going to be so
really
good.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Stanley Baker's best work. I'm going to say it here now. I don't care who it annoys.
Okay.
Stanley Baker's best work. I don't care who knows it. Matt is giving me daggers.
I am not. I can get behind that. That's a great point. But yeah, I'm so looking forward to that. It's going to be great.
It'll be brilliant. So look out for that, everyone, and we'll catch you next week. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.